Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stu again, and this time we're going to take a look at some renderings for the Taking Back the Streets series in the Pacific Northwest. For that, we're going to start in Eugene, Oregon. The idea behind this series is replacing interstate highways with rails. A controversial idea, but some people come up with this online, and I thought, you know what, hey, I have an ability to visualize this. Why not explore it and see if it makes any sense? Here's a shocker. It doesn't make sense in most places, but surprisingly, there are some where maybe it wouldn't be the worst idea. And that's why I look at it. So we're starting here in the Eugene, Oregon train station. I have this adjacent to a mall out there on Interstate 5. Eugene's a college town. It's about 200 miles south of Portland. Has a population of about 300,000. As I understand it, politicians in Oregon will insist that this be included in high-speed rail if it's ever built in Oregon. So that's why I included it as well. So we're on the way out of Eugene here on Interstate 5 to the north. Interstate 5 corridor is actually pretty good for this purpose. And right now we're traveling at about 125 miles per hour. Still in Eugene, this is one of the first videos that I played with using building models to simulate development. And in this case, we're going to develop the mall into some sort of mixed use village that has higher density, which also plays into a favorite theme of mine in some of these videos, utilizing dead malls and repurposing them for more urban ideas. So this is the countryside north of Eugene. The main purpose here was to show a high-speed section. This is 200 miles per hour. The interstate here is nearly dead straight for something like 60 miles. So in terms of finding corridors for this one's really good. It is not adjacent to rail, though. Rail's actually on the other side of the Willamette Valley from here. So there are some challenges to that. As you can see, there's nothing out here. Now we are in Albany, Oregon, which is about 40 miles north of Eugene and 60 miles south of Portland. It's actually not 200 miles between Portland and Eugene. Tell me you're not from Oregon without telling me you're not from Oregon. Anyway, Albany has a population of about 60,000. It's okay distance from Eugene, so I figured why not put a station here. If you don't like that, we can just skip it. This is probably one of my favorite rendering shots that I've done. I just thought the combination of the area, the station that I put together, the trains running through the shot, and the camera motion was pretty good there. As with all of my station shots, we witness the train come to a stop, the doors open, and then we wait for about 30 seconds while I talk about the travel times between city areas. For travel times, I figured Eugene to Portland, a little over 100 miles, a little over an hour. Portland to Seattle, 170 miles, 2 hours. Seattle to Vancouver, 140 miles, 2 hours. End to end, 420 miles, a little over 5 hours. So basically NEC type stuff. I should mention this video took about 2 weeks to make. And it's at a production value that I really have sadly been able to match yet again. A lot of the time I've been spending on renderings in the last 6 months have been removing portions of the map, which I actually didn't know how to do at this time, but was not really necessary when you're dealing with putting tracks on a freeway. There's nothing to remove. Now a lot of my time is spent like removing forests and stuff like that. Anyway, this is a different shot into the Salem station. Same basic idea, just from a different camera angle. Here we are with the in-cab view moving out of the Albany station, heading for Salem. Just kidding, it's the wrong Salem. All right, here we're coming into Salem. The freeway is really slow right here. I put the station in the area where the interstate crosses railroad tracks so that maybe you could have commuter service into downtown or something like that. It's kind of far from the capital area, but as far as the freeway goes, there's no way to accomplish getting into the middle of Salem. You'd need to use existing railroad rights of way for that. I established that the right of way, even sticking strictly to the interstate here, is pretty fast because, as I said, Interstate 15 is nearly dead straight between Eugene and Albany, so you can really fly there. And even though it's kind of slow through the Salem area, 200 miles an hour for 60 miles makes up for a lot of slowness. Yeah, so this is just a typical curve in the Salem area. I figured really that a train coming through here in the interstate alignment would be constrained to about 90 miles an hour. So it's really not a good high speed rail alignment. And most interstates are like this, where they're generally designed around interstate standards with a minimum radius of about half a mile, which is fine for driving a car on that at 70 miles an hour, but it's going to keep you pretty slow with a train, even a tilting one. Here we are in another top speed section north of Salem, just to show that the train is actually pretty fast between Eugene and Portland following I-5. All right, here we are. We're crossing the Willamette River and moving into the Portland area. So the way Portland is laid out is that the downtown area is kind of close to the river at the base of a mountain. Or maybe it's just hills. I don't know the exact elevation. And the interstate comes up from the south through the hills. Now, Interstate 5 is really interesting here because it's very windy and it has the tightest curves on an interstate that I have seen so far while investigating this subject. So a train through here would be really slow. It's a really terrible idea. You're not going to want to use the interstate for a train in a place like this. So this is an example of where this idea is really dumb. But conversely, we had the area between Eugene and Albany where it's actually a pretty good idea to use the interstate right away. So it's kind of interesting how parts of interstates can be good and parts of interstates can be bad for the concept. The gist is that creating a high speed rail route is not simple. All right, here we are in the downtown Portland area on the Willamette River, going over all the bridges that cross it. I included Portland's streetcar system to the best of my ability here, running across the bridge, just as a little extra. And here we have our high speed rail train running across the Interstate 5 bridge. Now, I have never been to Portland, but just from this view, like, this has got to be one of the damn ugliest freeways I've ever seen. Like, whoever thought that it would be a great idea to have this tangle of concrete on the riverfront? That would be a fascinating conversation to have with that person. Like, why did you think this was a good idea? It's there now. Unfortunately, it's probably never going away. I have a series where I remove urban freeways. So, hey, Portland, once I get around to you, maybe I'll be taking I-5 out of service for you just to see what it might look like. So that comes up to an area called the Rose Quarter, and the Rose Quarter is significant because it has an arena and a convention center and all sorts of other stuff. Not only that, it has a very large transit center that includes Portland's various railed transit. So it's a good place to put a station, In one of the studies that I read while researching the Pacific Northwest high speed rail subject, this is where they put their station. Now, getting high speed rail through Portland is a fascinating subject because it will not be easy if they ever attempt to do this. In my other video I made about this, where I take it a little bit more seriously, I ran like a 19-mile tunnel under the city because I just didn't find any good way to do it. All right, now we're crossing the Columbia on this giant I-5 bridge. They're actually talking about replacing this bridge, which is a fascinating project in of itself. As you can see, it's an enormous bridge. It's a lift bridge, so that would not work out great for our purposes. And there's no way in hell that it would be able to hold a train in its current state. So maybe it's a good thing they're rebuilding it. Always the possibility that they'll rebuild it with rail. Probably not. Here we are in Kelso, Washington, about 40 miles north of Portland. And the reason I rendered this one out is that Kelso would be a possible station location. That's because of the distance from Portland. But ultimately, I judged that the area population just wasn't large enough. So maybe that would be something that you would want to add on later. But as far as like an express service, I didn't bother with a stop. Another feature about that particular area was that the station location would have been a dead mall, which is, of course, a personal favorite. Now we're way up by Olympia, Washington. And that is because there is no 3D Google Maps data between Kelso and Olympia. So even though that's kind of an interesting section of the route, there's just nothing to render there. Dead straight right here, I think I have the train going about 125 miles per hour. And now we are pulling into the capital of Washington, Olympia. You can see the Capitol building in the background there. If you were to use the freeway to do this, your Olympia station location would be terrible. And there's no getting around that because the freeway is just not in the greatest place to drop off train passengers. So here it is, just sitting in the middle of the woods. Oh, but you got a nice view of, I believe that's Mount Hood in the background. Mount Rainier, maybe? Who knows? One of those volcanoes, those Cascades volcanoes. And here we are pulling into the Olympia station, surrounded by trees. Very lovely. And now we're pulling out of the Olympia station. So this section of freeway is particularly slow. Definitely wouldn't be good for the purpose. I felt in some ways this video was in response to the FRA corridors video that I did on the Pacific Northwest, where I elected to skip Olympia and Tacoma, much to the horror of pretty much everyone in Washington. My logic there was that those could be taken care of by local transit instead of a high-speed train, but this is kind of the way that it works, is that everyone wants a stop where they live, even when it doesn't necessarily make all that much sense. Okay, so speaking of that, we are in Tacoma now, and of course coming into the Tacoma Dome. And that's naturally where I put my station. Where else would you put it? Again, the Interstate is an outlier freeway here, which is actually pretty good compared to most cities. Most cities, the downtown is ringed by interstates, or it just straight out obliterates the middle of the downtown. But in Tacoma, the freeway is actually situated a pretty far distance from downtown and gives it some space to breathe. So from that standpoint, not necessarily from a transit-oriented development standpoint, but from that standpoint, I think this would be a pretty good location. And then of course, you also have the Tacoma Dome. Making these videos, I also learned the phrase aroma of Tacoma, which I haven't been up there, so I haven't smelled it, but anyone familiar with that phrase knows what it is. And now we're coming out of Tacoma to the north. Actually, it's more like the east. And Tacoma area freeway is pretty slow too. Just in general, the freeway around here is not particularly great for the idea. I think here we're running about 110 or 125. Freeways in general seem to be okay as long as you're not trying to go too fast. So yeah, so we're headed out of Tacoma on our way to Seattle. And here we are. I have no idea why I skipped this far ahead. Maybe just because I wanted to avoid talking about SeaTac. But we're headed up the hill to downtown Seattle. This is probably one of the more absurd renderings I've done. There's no way this would work. The grade up the hill right here is about 4%, I figured. This is one of the more remarkable freeways in the country, in my opinion, at least as far as I've seen. They ran this thing straight up the hill, carved it out of the side of the hill. It runs through the middle of downtown. It goes through like a cave or something. Like it's just really incredible what they dared to dream of with this freeway. Yeah, so stopping right in the middle of downtown, hey, that's a great station location. You can't really argue with that. That would be a fantastic place to drop people off. Um, but no way it's happening. In the FRA corridors video, I just went with like another 20-mile tunnel. Portland at least has some minor possibilities of doing it a different way. Seattle is near impossible without a tunnel. At least not at speed, and a long one too. There are different ways you could do that. I had a lot of people arguing with me on that one for under US 99, I believe it was, which isn't the worst option. Cut and cover rather than a deep bore tunnel like I was proposing straight to the I-5 right away. So there are some different options of what kind of tunnel you want to do, but I'm pretty sure you're going to need a pretty long tunnel to try to do that. And at the end of that tunnel, you're going to end up around Everett, Washington here. And Everett is another station that I put there. And it's just a distance. The distance from downtown Seattle to Everett was pretty good for a stop. I think Everett's got a population of about 200,000, so it's not a terribly sized city for the purpose. You can see that, Seattle in this area is just beautiful. It would be really nice to take a trip up there one day and kind of explore the proposed route. I seriously doubt that if Pacific Northwest High Speed Rail or Cascadia High Speed Rail or whatever you want to call it is constructed, that it will happen while I'm alive. But it would still be kind of nice to go up there and just see the terrain and see it firsthand what they're dealing with, because it looks really, really difficult from maps. And here we are in Everett. I put the Everett over rail line just like I did in Salem, Oregon. It seemed like it would have a pretty good connection to downtown by some sort of transit. You can see downtown in the background there. It's not that far away, only a couple miles. And then that would go out of Everett to the north. It's kind of curvy. It's not fast here. And here next to the Everett station, you could manage some transit-oriented development because there's quite a bit of land that could be developed. And it looks like it's actually in the process of being developed. So by the time someone actually built like something like this, maybe it wouldn't be there to develop anymore. This is up by Marysville, just a little bit north of Everett. And I think your train here, you can see it zooming by the cars. Train here, you probably get up to about 150 miles an hour. The freeway is pretty straight at this point. So there are places where, a freeway alignment isn't half bad. It's just the real problem with interstates is that it's not consistent enough. And then, of course, you also have to deal with the inevitable opposition to the idea from anyone who drives. All right, so now we're a little bit further north. We're coming into Burlington, and Burlington is another mid-sized city that you probably wouldn't deal with stopping at, except on a regional train. We're on an express here for the video, but once again, the reason Burlington is rendered is because we got a hot, half-dead mall right next to the freeway, and boy, would that make a fun place for a stop. And there it is. And you can see by the amount of cars in the parking lot that it's not doing so hot. Could really use a high-speed rail train station and maybe some transit-oriented development. But we'll pass it by and we'll keep going north toward Bellingham or Bellingham or however they pronounce it up there. My favorite aspect of videos, constantly hearing that I've mispronounced something. So now we are charging up the mountains between Burlington and Bellingham, and this is slow going. This is definitely not something you actually want to do on a high-speed rail line. I think I figured it would be about 75 miles per hour. And the grades, while a challenge, aren't impossible. So you could definitely do this. It's just a dumb idea. In the Pacific Northwest HSR corridor video, I had quite a bit of tunneling right here. So that's kind of one of the drawbacks of Pacific Northwest as a concept. A lot of tunneling, and I mean a lot. All right, now we're in Bellingham. We're coming into the station site. I put it at the airport. I didn't really find a great spot in the downtown area, even though that might be better. I think you got a lot of potential there, though, with a station at the airport for expanding that airport into a better regional airport, because you'd be able to get lots of places in the region much faster from there. Also, some potential to relieve SeaTac a little bit with this airport, because you'd be able to get there pretty fast from Seattle. And this is view number 2 coming into Bellingham Station. And the reason I did this one was I wasn't real happy with the view of the airport on the first rendering. I wanted to convey, the proximity of the station to the airport and give a good idea that you are genuinely close to the airport terminals here, close enough to walk or have some sort of moving walkway or short tram or something like that, but it's actually pretty close to the terminals. All right, now the train is going to move out of Bellingham, Washington Station, which is located by the airport once again, and we're going to head for the Canadian border. But first, here's a view of Mount Hood or Mount Rainier or whatever Cascades volcano that is. I'm gonna get hate mail after this video. All right, here we are at the border, and this is a little bit different rendering for me. Here I managed to cut my rendering into a photograph of, into Google Street View of the border, which was the first for me, and actually that's the only time so far that I've done it. I thought it turned out pretty well. Now we're north of the border. We're in Canada. This is Surrey. It's kind of like I'm probably going to get murdered for saying this. It's a far southern suburb of Vancouver. If I remember correctly, the area has a population of about 200,000. Kind of worthy of a stop, but I didn't put one there. One of the challenges through this area is getting past the Fraser River, and we will do that by utilizing the existing road tunnel underneath the river. Anyway, the tunnel goes under the river. I used the existing tunnel, and I would say that there is about a 0.1% chance that that would be possible. But I went with it anyway. You'd probably need to dig a new tunnel to get under that river. All right, now we're further north. We're coming into kind of Vancouver proper. We're going over the Fraser River again, this time on a bridge. How's that possible? Well, it's a distributary delta, so there's more than one branch of the river. Oh, by the way, we're on BC 99. So at the border, Interstate 5 switched over to BC 99. So the gist is that we've moved off the freeway. Now we're following BC 99 over this river, through the woods, and into Vancouver. BC 99 runs on surface streets. Right here, the train would be like 30 miles an hour. It would be ridiculously so. So this is something you would never do. This is stupid. It's fantasy, but at the same time, I think it's kind of funny. So I just went with it. All right, now we are going into downtown Vancouver, and this was my favorite part of the entire video because I got to render the train right over the streets through the canyons of the city. So the way I envisioned this was our high-speed rail line would be kind of second floor elevated over the street, and then we would just run straight down the street here to our ultimate high-speed rail station, which would be linked up with the waterfront station in downtown Vancouver. And I thought that was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun rendering this one out. There's even less chance of this happening. Out of everything in this very unrealistic video, this is the least realistic idea, and that's what makes it so great. So with that, we're pulling into the Vancouver high-speed rail station, situated above the street. They're right in downtown. Fantastic. I say build it. Build it, build it, build it. All right, so that does it. We've made it from Eugene, Oregon to Vancouver, British Columbia, somehow by following I-5 and BC 99. Overall, it's a bad idea. Maybe if high-speed rail gets built at some point in the future, you might see portions of the I-5 right away. I would say that's especially true between Portland and Eugene, and then between Portland and Olympia, Washington. We'll have to see what happens with Cascadia high-speed rail in the Pacific Northwest. They are very slowly working their way through the process of trying to pull that off. It's going to be very expensive, I can guarantee it, and it's going to take a very long time. Conversely, there are also a lot of voices out there in the Pacific Northwest that are saying that instead of doing that, they should be working on making Amtrak Cascades better. So we'll see what happens. That's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you on that big, beautiful freeway.